People look at me today and see success. They see the company, the wealth, the influence, and the life I built from nothing. What they don't see is the child who spent years feeling invisible inside his own home. Hi, I'm Dan. I wasn't born into a broken family. I was born into a family where I simply didn't matter. At least, that's how it felt. I have one elder brother, Nathan. He is 8 years older than me. Nathan was everything my parents could ever want. He got the best gifts, the most attention, and endless praise for even the smallest things. When he walked into a room, everyone smiled. When I walked into a room, nobody seemed to notice. If Nathan made a mistake, people laughed it off. If I made one, I was the problem. I used to watch my parents celebrate his achievements while mine were forgotten before the day was over. Birthdays, school events, family gatherings, it was always about Nathan. I was just there in the background, like a shadow following someone else's life. It feels like I was not a child they wanted. I was just a mistake. I tried harder. I studied harder. I behaved better. I did everything I could to earn even a fraction of the attention Nathan received without trying. But no matter what I did, it never changed anything. I remember standing with my report card in my hands, waiting for someone to ask how I had done. Nobody did. Nathan was spoiled, and everyone knew it, except my parents. If he threw a tantrum, they called it passion. If he was rude to someone, they said he was having a bad day. The worst part wasn't that Nathan made mistakes. It was that his mistakes never seemed to matter. When he broke rules, they laughed and called him mischievous. When he got into trouble at school, my parents defended him before even hearing the full story. Every bad decision came with an excuse, and every consequence somehow disappeared before it could reach him. Meanwhile, I felt like I was walking on a tightrope. One mistake from me could lead to lectures, disappointment, or punishment. Nathan could do wrong and still be the golden child. I could do everything right and still be overlooked. I remember birthdays that felt like ordinary days. I wasn't abused. I wasn't hated. I was simply forgotten. There is a special kind of pain in being surrounded by people and still feeling alone. I remember bringing home achievements that nobody cared about. I remember waiting for appreciation that never came. I remember watching Nathan receive support while I learned how to survive without it. Nathan grew up surrounded by praise and privilege. I grew up surrounded by silence. The difference between us became even clearer when Nathan went to college. My parents bought him a brand new car without a second thought. They called it a reward for all his hard work. A few years later, when it was my turn, I wasn't given a car. In fact, I wasn't given anything new at all. Most of what I had came from Nathan, his old laptop, his old furniture, his old clothes, and whatever else he no longer needed. While Nathan got opportunities, I got hand-me-downs. I remember looking at that shiny new car in the driveway and wondering what it felt like to be someone's first choice. As a child, I kept asking myself one question. Why am I never enough? No matter how hard I tried, the answer never changed. So eventually, I stopped asking. And I started building. I always find a way to be busy in my own world. I learned to be friends with my books. While others were enjoying their lives, I was fighting battles nobody knew existed. I studied when I was exhausted. I worked when I was afraid. Nathan got admitted to an expensive private college. My parents paid the fees without hesitation, proud to tell everyone where he was studying. For me, the conversation was different. If I wanted to go to college, I had to earn it. I spent countless nights studying for scholarship exams because I knew there was no one waiting to write a check for my future. While Nathan focused on college life, I focused on making sure I could afford one. He was given opportunities. I kept moving forward even when every part of me wanted to quit. Because I had nothing else. No backup plan. No family support. No safety net. Only a dream. And a burning desire to prove that I was worth something. My scholarship covered some of the expenses, but it wasn't enough. So while other students spent their evenings relaxing, I spent mine working. I taught myself how to build websites and apps, taking on freelance projects whenever I could. Every line of code, every completed project, and every late night in front of my laptop helped me to pay for my food, books, and daily expenses. There were nights when I was exhausted, juggling classes, deadlines, and client work. But I kept going because I knew that if I stopped, there was nobody else to fall back on. Everything I had, I earned myself. The years that followed were brutal. There were failures. There were nights when my bank account looked hopeless. There were mornings when I woke up wondering whether this entire struggle was meaningless. One day, while searching for freelance work, I received an email from the owner of a struggling restaurant. Business had been declining for months, and they couldn't afford the expensive agencies that most restaurants hired for their websites. They needed someone who could build a professional website on a tight budget. For most developers, it was just another small project. For me, it was an opportunity. I accepted the contract immediately. At the time, I thought it would be another freelance job to help cover my college expenses. I had no idea that this small restaurant and the website I was about to build for it would end up changing my life. The website took weeks of work. I redesigned their online presence, added online reservations, improved the menu layout, and made sure customers could easily find the restaurant. A few weeks later, the owner called me. Business was growing. More customers were finding the restaurant online, reservations had increased, and for the first time in a long while, the owner sounded genuinely excited about the future. As a thank you, he handed me a check for $2,500. To most people, it might not have seemed like much. But to me, it was the first time someone had paid me not just for my work, but for the value I had created. That check changed something inside me. For years, I had been struggling just to get by. Now, I was starting to see a future where I could build something of my own. I continued taking projects, helping small businesses grow through websites and apps. One client became 3. 3 became 10. Before long, I was earning more than I had ever imagined as a college student. By the age of 22, I had saved enough money and gained enough experience to start my own software company. Dan Tech Solutions. The same kid who had spent his childhood living in his brother's shadow was now building something with his own name on it. My company started with just me, a laptop, and a small apartment that doubled as my office. At first, I handled everything myself: development, client meetings, support, marketing, and accounting. The days were long, and the nights were even longer. But every successful project brought in new clients, and every new client brought more opportunities. Soon, I couldn't do it all alone. I hired my first employee, then a second, then a third. Before long, my small operation had grown into a real company with a team of talented people working alongside me. Year after year, our client list expanded, our reputation grew, and profits continued to rise. After graduating, Nathan didn't have to spend months searching for work like most people. My father made a few phone calls, spoke to some of his contacts, and before long Nathan had a well-paying job waiting for him. Everyone praised him for his success, talking about how bright his future was. Nobody mentioned the connections that had opened the door for him. Meanwhile, I was building my future from scratch. No recommendations. No shortcuts. No influential people making calls on my behalf. Every client I gained, every project I completed, and every dollar I earned came from my own effort. Nathan had a network to rely on. I had only myself. Slowly, things began to change. The company grew. Opportunities appeared. Success followed. Then success turned into something much bigger. By the time I turned 27, the company was generating more revenue than I had ever dreamed possible. For the first time in my life, I was a millionaire. The kid who had worn hand-me-down clothes, studied for scholarships, and worked late nights to pay college bills had built something that nobody had given him. Every dollar represented a risk I had taken, a problem I had solved, and a challenge I had overcome. And for the first time in my life, nobody could take that away from me. My name started to grow in business circles as highly trusted and reputed IT service provider. People wanted my advice. Investors wanted meetings. The world finally saw value in the person my own family had overlooked. Even after becoming a millionaire, not much changed about the way I lived. While people expected me to buy a mansion or drive a luxury car, I stayed in the same one-bedroom apartment I had lived in for years. It wasn't fancy, but it was enough for me. I drove a basic car that got me from one place to another. No expensive sports cars. No flashy watches. No need to prove anything to anyone. Maybe it was because I knew what it felt like to have nothing. Maybe it was because I had spent so much of my life struggling that I learned to appreciate simple things. My money went back into growing the company, supporting my employees, and creating opportunities for others. Nathan always chased the appearance of success. I was more interested in what success allowed me to build. At 27, I had more money than I ever imagined having, yet I still lived simply. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. For the first time in my life, I had enough. And that was more valuable than any luxury money could buy. The funny thing was that my family still thought I was a loser. They saw the one-bedroom apartment and assumed I couldn't afford anything better. They saw my basic car and thought I wasn't successful. Whenever they compared me to Nathan, they talked about his job, his lifestyle, and all the things he owned. My family was convinced that I was struggling in life. Whenever they asked about me, it felt less like concern and more like pity. They looked at my small apartment and basic car and assumed I was barely getting by. A few times, I tried to tell them about my company. I tried to explain the projects we were working on, the clients we had, and how much the business had grown. But before I could finish, they would dismiss it. To them, I was just a nerd who spent all day coding for fun. He's always been obsessed with computers. It's probably just a hobby. Maybe one day he'll get a real job. They never listened long enough to understand what I was actually saying. After a while, I stopped trying. If they wanted to believe I was struggling, let them. While they were busy overlooking me, my company kept growing, my team kept expanding, and my life kept moving forward. For years, they ignored my words. Nobody bothered to ask about my life. Nobody cared enough to find out what I actually did for a living. To them, I was still the quiet kid who never measured up to their expectations. I could have told them that my company was profitable, that I employed dozens of people, or that I had become a millionaire years ago. But I didn't. I had spent my entire childhood trying to prove my worth to them. At some point, I realized I didn't need their approval anymore. So I let them believe whatever they wanted. While they were busy calling me a failure, I was busy building a life I was proud of. A few years later, Nathan got engaged to his girlfriend. My parents were thrilled. They treated the engagement like a major family achievement and spent weeks talking about wedding plans, venues, and the future that awaited him. From the outside, Nathan's life looked perfect. But behind the scenes, things were starting to fall apart. Nathan had always lived beyond his means. Growing up, he never had to worry about money because someone else was always there to cover the cost. That habit followed him into adulthood. He spent money as quickly as he earned it, expensive vacations, designer clothes, luxury gadgets, and a lifestyle that was far more expensive than his salary could comfortably support. The more he earned, the more he spent. By the time he got engaged, debts were beginning to pile up, savings were almost non-existent, and financial stress was becoming impossible to ignore. Yet Nathan kept pretending everything was fine. For years, he had been rewarded for avoiding consequences. Now, for the first time in his life, reality was catching up with him. Years of careless spending had caught up with him, but instead of changing his habits, he continued living the same way. Every raise led to more spending. Every bonus disappeared within weeks. Whenever he ran into financial trouble, my father stepped in to help. Need money for a down payment? My father helped. Struggling with bills? My father helped. Unexpected expenses? My father helped. What amazed me wasn't the help itself, it was that my father was still proud of him. After some time, I didn't even know Nathan was getting married. There was no invitation. No phone call. No message. I found out by accident when one of my cousins casually mentioned the wedding during a conversation. At first, I thought there had been some misunderstanding. Surely my own family wouldn't hide something like that from me. So I called my mother. I asked her why nobody had told me about Nathan's wedding. Instead of an apology, I got blamed. She said it was my own fault. According to her, I had distanced myself from the family. Then, after a long pause, she finally told me the real reason. They were embarrassed by me. They thought I was poor. They didn't want relatives asking questions about the son who lived in a small apartment, drove an ordinary car, and spent all day in front of a computer. As I listened, I felt strangely calm. For years, I had watched them choose Nathan over me. For years, I had tried to earn a place in the family. And now I had my answer. I wasn't forgotten. I was excluded. Not because of who I was, but because of who they thought I was. When the call ended, I sat there staring at my phone. My family believed I was a failure. Meanwhile, the company I had built employed dozens of people and generated more money in a month than they thought I earned in a year. Yet none of that hurt as much as realizing that my own family had been ashamed of me all along. After that phone call, something inside me changed. For most of my life, I had been carrying a weight I didn't even realize was there. A part of me was always hoping that one day my family would notice me, appreciate me, or treat me the same way they treated Nathan. That day, I finally let go of that hope. I stopped calling. I stopped checking in. I stopped chasing people who had never truly made an effort to know me. And for the first time in years, I felt relief. Not anger. Not revenge. Relief. It was as if I had spent my entire life knocking on a door that was never going to open. The moment I stopped knocking, the pain began to fade. I realized that I had been hiding a deep loneliness inside me for years, constantly trying to earn attention that should never have needed to be earned in the first place. Once I stopped seeking their approval, I felt free. My life became quieter, but it also became lighter. I focused on my company, my friends, my employees, and the people who genuinely wanted me in their lives. For the first time, I wasn't living to prove anything to anyone. I was simply living for myself. And that brought me more peace than all the recognition I had spent years chasing. Then, when I least expected it, I met the woman who would change my life, my love Ilsa. For years, I had carried emptiness inside me. No matter how successful I became, no matter how much money I earned, there was still a part of me that longed for the love and attention I had missed growing up. I never talked about it. Most people saw a confident businessman. They didn't see the lonely kid who had spent years wondering why he was never enough. But she did. She saw past the success, past the company, past the image I showed the world. She listened when I spoke, remembered the little things, and made me feel valued in a way I had never experienced before. She didn't care about my money, my achievements, or my status. She cared about me. Slowly, the emptiness I had carried for so long began to disappear. The constant need for approval, the loneliness, the feeling of being overlooked, it all started to lose its hold on me. For the first time in my life, I felt truly loved. Not because of what I could provide. Not because of what I had accomplished. But simply because I was me. And in her, I found something I had been searching for my entire life, a place where I felt wanted, accepted, and at home. Time passed when the truth about me came out by accident. One of my cousins worked at a company that had recently signed a major software contract. During a family gathering, he casually mentioned the name of the company. Dan Tech Solutions. Wait, my cousin said. You know Dan owns that company, right? The room went silent. My father frowned. What are you talking about? The company that signed the deal. Dan founded it years ago. Nathan laughed. Dan? The guy who lives in a one-bedroom apartment and drives that old car. My cousin looked confused. Yeah. Dan. The same guy whose company employs hundreds of people. The smile disappeared from Nathan's face. My mother shook her head. That can't be right. My cousin pulled out his phone and showed them the company's website. My name was right there under founder and CEO. No one spoke. For years, they had ignored me. For years, they had assumed I was struggling. And now they were staring at proof that everything they believed about me was wrong. My father finally broke the silence. How much is the company worth? I almost laughed when my cousin told them. The color drained from their faces. Nathan looked down at the table. My mother whispered, "You're saying Dan is a millionaire?" Has been for years, my cousin replied. Years. That was the part that hit them the hardest. Not that I was successful, but that I had been successful for years while they were busy feeling ashamed of me. My father sat there speechless. The same man who had once helped Nathan with bills, loans, and expenses now realized that the son he considered a failure had quietly built a fortune on his own. And the funny thing, when I heard about their reaction, I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt nothing. Because by then, I no longer needed their approval. The boy who spent years begging to be noticed was gone. And no amount of shock, regret, or disbelief could bring him back. A year later, my life looked very different. Not because I suddenly wanted to show off my success, but because I had finally stopped living as if I had something to prove. I bought a beautiful home, spacious, peaceful, and filled with everything I had once dreamed of having as a child. For the first time in my life, I had a place that truly felt like home. I also bought a car I genuinely loved. Not to impress anyone. Not to make a statement. Simply because I could. But neither of those things compared to what happened next. I married the woman I loved. The same woman who had stood beside me before anyone knew about my success. The woman who saw value in me as a human Dan, not a millionaire, not a CEO. And then came the happiest day of my life. My son was born. The first time I held him in my arms, I made a promise to myself. He would never have to wonder if he was loved. He would never have to compete for my attention. He would never spend years trying to earn affection that should have been given freely. As I looked down at his tiny face, I realized something. The cycle ended with me. All the loneliness, neglect, and pain that had followed me through childhood would go no further. My son would grow up knowing exactly how much he mattered. My son became the part of my life I never knew was missing. Every time he ran into my arms, laughed at one of my silly jokes, or proudly showed me something he had made, my heart felt full in a way it never had before. I made sure to be there for every important moment, every bedtime story, every school event, every scraped knee, and every victory, no matter how small. Because I knew what it felt like to grow up wishing someone would pay attention. My son would never have that feeling. He would never have to wonder if he was loved. He would never have to compete for affection or try to earn a place in my heart. He already had it. Sometimes, when he hugged me and said, "I love you, Dad," I felt tears in my eyes. Not because I was sad. But because, through him, I had finally found the love and belonging I had been searching for my entire life. And in that moment, I felt richer than any amount of money could ever make me. While I was moving on with my life, Nathan's life was heading in a different direction. For years, he had lived without facing many consequences for his actions. Whenever something went wrong, someone else stepped in to fix it. But eventually, that kind of lifestyle catches up with a person. The pressure of maintaining appearances, financial problems, and poor decisions began to take their toll. Nathan started getting involved in dishonest business dealings, always looking for shortcuts instead of doing things the right way. What began as small questionable decisions eventually turned into serious fraud that put both his reputation and career at risk. At the same time, his marriage was falling apart. Constant arguments about money, trust, and responsibility created a growing distance between him and his wife. The life that had looked perfect from the outside was filled with tension behind closed doors. For the first time in his life, Nathan couldn't rely on charm, excuses, or family support to solve every problem. The consequences he had avoided for years were finally catching up with him. And the image of success that everyone had admired was beginning to crack. It was funny how quickly people's opinions could change. For years, I was the useless son, the disappointment. The family embarrassment who wasn't even worth inviting to a wedding. But the moment they learned about my company, my house, and my success, the phone calls started. First, it was my mother. "Dan, we're family. Family should support each other." Then my father. "Your brother is going through a difficult time. He needs help." Nathan eventually called too. The same brother who had barely spoken to me in years now sounded friendlier than ever. "Come on, Dan. We're brothers." Brothers. The word almost made me laugh. Where was that brotherhood when I was studying for scholarships? Where was it when I was working nights to pay my bills? Where was it when I wasn't invited to his wedding? Suddenly, the son they were ashamed of had become useful. One evening, my parents came to visit my home. The moment they stepped through the gates, they froze. My father looked at the house in stunned silence. My mother kept glancing around as if she couldn't believe she was standing there. When they entered the living room, neither of them spoke for several seconds. The house was larger than anything they had imagined I could afford. Family photos covered the walls. My wife welcomed them politely. My son ran through the hallway laughing. This wasn't the life of a struggling failure. This was the life of a man who had quietly built everything they said he never would. I noticed my mother avoiding eye contact. My father seemed uncomfortable, almost nervous. For years, they had looked down on me. Now they couldn't even look me in the eye. "Dan," my mother finally whispered. There was something in her voice I had never heard before. Shame. Not because I had become successful, but because they realized how wrong they had been. They remembered every comparison, every dismissal, every time they chose Nathan over me, every time they treated me as if I would never amount to anything. My father stared at the family photos on the wall. "You built all of this yourself?" he asked quietly. "Yes," I replied. The silence that followed was heavy. For the first time, they weren't looking at Nathan with pride. They were looking at me with regret. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "Dan, Nathan is in a difficult situation. He has debts. He needs money." I looked at him quietly. The same man who had spent years rescuing Nathan from the consequences of his choices was now asking me to do the same. "Why me?" I asked. My mother looked offended. "Because you're his brother." I smiled sadly. "Interesting. I wasn't his brother when he got married." The room fell silent. For the first time, nobody had an answer. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't looking for revenge. But I had spent my entire life learning a lesson they never did. Helping someone is kindness. Enabling someone is not. And after years of being treated like the family's failure, I wasn't about to become Nathan's safety net simply because I had succeeded. The useless son they ignored was gone. The man sitting in front of them knew his worth. And judging by the way they couldn't meet my eyes, they finally knew it too. My parents were ashamed when they finally learned the truth. For years, they had judged me, ignored me, and treated me like the family's failure. Now they could barely look me in the eye. The realization of how wrong they had been weighed heavily on them. Nathan was struggling, and despite everything that had happened, I chose to help him financially. Not because he had earned it. Not because my parents suddenly deserved my kindness. But because, at the end of the day, they were still my family. I helped him pay off his immediate debts and gave him a chance to get back on his feet. But this time, my heart was different. There was no desperate hope for their approval. No expectation that they would finally love me. No belief that helping them would heal the past. I helped because it was the right thing to do, not because I owed them anything. The boy who once begged for their attention was gone. The man I had become could offer help without expecting anything in return. And though I opened my hand to help them, I kept my heart guarded like stone. After helping Nathan, I made one final decision. I cut off every connection with my family. There were no dramatic arguments. No final confrontation. No angry messages. I was simply done. For years, I had carried the weight of their neglect, their favoritism, and their expectations. I had spent enough of my life trying to earn a place in their hearts. I wished them well, and then I walked away. A few months later, my wife, my son, and I moved to a new city where nobody knew my past. There were no family expectations, no comparisons to Nathan, and no painful memories waiting around every corner. Just a fresh start. Our days became peaceful. I spent time with my wife, watched my son grow, and continued running my company from a distance. The life I had always wanted was finally mine. Sometimes I would sit on the porch in the evening, watching my son play while my wife sat beside me, and I would think about how far I had come. The lonely boy who felt invisible had found a home. Not in a house. Not in money. But in the family he had built for himself. And for the first time in my life, I was truly happy. Not because I had proven anyone wrong, but because I no longer cared if they thought I was right. For most of my life, I thought family was something I had lost. I spent years chasing acceptance, hoping for love, and trying to earn a place where I belonged. But in the end, I realized that family isn't always the one you're born into. Sometimes, it's the one you build. When I looked at my wife and my son, I finally understood what had been missing all those years. My wife gave me the love, understanding, and support I had searched for my entire life. My son gave me a chance to break the cycle and become the father I always wished I had. Together, they filled the emptiness that had followed me since childhood. For the first time, I didn't feel incomplete. I didn't feel unwanted. I didn't feel alone. As I watched my wife smile and my son laugh, I realized something simple but powerful. I had finally found my family. And for the first time in my life, my family felt complete.